You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to another episode of Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, I've got a well-experienced and seasoned veteran of the banking world. He is a leadership thinker, and he is going to share with us some of his ideas and experiences. We've got a little bit of a double barrel opportunity here, and we'll get into that as we get going. But with that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Ken Wilcox. Ken, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah. So if you will, Ken, and we've got a little bit of a tradition on the show here to try to do, I know for those who might hear, but more importantly, for those who see, Ken's a more distinguished, slightly older gentleman. So can you pack your career into about a 2-minute synopsis for us?
Absolutely. When I started out my career, I studied actually in Germany for several years and ended up getting a PhD in German studies and ended up then teaching at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill for a few years. And although I enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it enough to stay. So I left and went to business school. And when I graduated from business school, I started working at a bank in Boston, lending money to early stage venture-backed technology companies. And fundamentally, that's the business I've been involved in now for almost 40 years. In 1990, I joined SVB, a very small bank in Northern California at the time. I became CEO in 2001 and was CEO for 10 years. At the end of those 10 years, the board, rather than just letting me retire, asked me to go to China and set up a joint venture bank in China, which my wife and I decided to do because it was a big adventure. We loved our 4 years in China. I will say that the Chinese Communist Party is a very problematic joint venture partner. So I have ambivalent feelings, I should say, about those 4 years in China. In any case, I formally retired then in 2019 and wrote books, one of which is about leading through culture. And the other one is about doing business in China.
Very interesting. Well, we will get into both of those. So I, as most of my listeners know, I have a little special passion for those who went through the banking world and the opportunities we get as bankers to see the world from a different lens and see a multifaceted world, because the higher up the bank, inside the bank you go, you do get involved in a lot of different business segments and different size companies, different leadership cultures and teams. So that's the one area I'd like to kind of kick off on, is the notion of company culture. When we were prepping in the green room, I mentioned to Ken that I had an observation that there's a lot written about creating a culture at your company, but the place where I've seen culture initiatives fail is that the leadership team's not necessarily on the same page. You can write some words on the wall in gold letters for values and principles and beliefs, but if you don't really do the work getting your leadership team rallied around that and all thinking the same way and speaking the same language about those values, you're probably not going to launch the culture you think you're going to. So, Ken, what say you on that idea?
Well, I think that that actually goes back a long way in my life. When I was growing up, my father taught at General Motors Institute, the only automotive engineering school in the world, at least at the time. But he didn't teach engineering, he taught organizational behavior. So my brothers and I were the beneficiaries of his long lectures over the dinner table for several years. I think that influenced my thinking.
Funny how that works out, right?
Well, he was a visionary, I think, and somewhat of a romantic. He firmly believed that most people in most corporations spent about half their time working and about half their time jockeying for power and or position, and that for the most part they weren't that happy. And so he envisioned a world in which people really enjoyed their work and applied themselves to their work and moved up what he referred to as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They slowly became everything they could be. So that was his vision. I thought about it when I entered the corporate world, when I started my banking career 40 years ago. And I realized that he was kind of right, that the banks that I was working in were really places where people spent like half their time working and the other half the time trying to figure out how to get ahead of the person sitting next to them.
Right.
That nobody was all that happy for the most part. They weren't. So I thought to myself, if I do get the opportunity to become CEO of an organization, I will try to do things differently. And I would say you're totally correct. This has to emanate from the top, or it doesn't emanate from anywhere. Because the truth is, people subconsciously follow their leaders. Meaning, if their leaders act a certain way, they will subconsciously begin acting that same way, whether they intend to or not. And the problem we have in many corporations is that the leadership team does invent or come up with a set of values, but they often as not don't articulate them, don't walk the talk, act differently than what they say everybody else should do. And the result is you end up with a culture that's far from what the CEO may have actually intended.
And I've seen that play out in so many ways in several different industries that I've had a chance to work with as a coach. You know, I think of one in particular, longstanding, 100-year legacy type tradition. And they were a very staunch command and control kind of culture. And back in the day, there were good reasons for that. But I saw people operating with that same sort of iron-fisted way. And if I was engaged to coach them, I would ask them the question, why? Why do you view the world that way? And the answer was always 100%, because that's what my boss used to do. And he was successful, so I want to be successful. I will do what he did. And it's like, yeah, but no, that's not a good reason. Yeah. So, when I asked the question, did you like working for that guy under that environment? And the answer was inevitably not really. I just endured it. And it's like, well, then why do you want to perpetuate it? So there were some interesting learning and unlearning that had to happen to get those guys moving in a different direction.
Well, I think what you're saying actually applies to me in a way. And what I mean by that is when I became CEO of Silicon Valley Bank in 2001, the first thing I felt was elation. This is great. I mean, who wouldn't like to be CEO? But the second thing I felt was real fear because I realized I didn't know how to do it. And when I thought about the examples that have been set for me by prior CEOs, frankly, they weren't all that great. So I had to start from ground zero. I almost instantaneously started reading books and talking to CEOs that I admired but hadn't worked for, and developed, it took me a couple of years, but I developed a way of going about it that seemed to work really, really well. I'll give you just one example, and that is this whole business of internal competition. I don't think it works that well. I think many, many banks have so much internal competition that they lose sight of the importance of making their customers happy. And it cuts down on productivity when people are constantly at war with each other inside the organization. So one of the things we decided to do, actually, I guess you could say I decided to do, but I created a team that agreed with me at the top, was to reward cooperation. In other words, two of the important values at SVB were make the customer as happy as you can make them, and join forces in order to make that possible. In other words, people got rewarded for cooperation, internal cooperation, in the process of making customers happy. And we put it actually into the bonus program. So for a long time there, when I was CEO, half the bonus was based on whether or not they met their goals. And the other half was based on whether or not their coworkers felt that they were helpful to them. Because banking is a team effort. You might have a couple of prima donnas, but prima donnas alone can't succeed in making customers happy. It takes a whole bank working successfully together.
Right. You know, it's interesting you bring that up. I had a very similar experience in my banking day, and I didn't quite make it to the C-suite at my bank, but I was a fairly senior officer. But at one point, I was managing a team of about 300, and I felt a little of that tension you're talking about in the ranks. And so I created a program. I went out and I got a manufacturer to give me some classic county fair blue ribbons. They were about 8 inches tall and blue and red, which was our bank colors. And I called it the Thanks I Needed That program. And what I did was I gave 5 of those ribbons to every employee in my group. And I said, when one of your colleagues helps you on something, if you think they merited, give them a ribbon for it. Give them a blue ribbon for their effort. And pretty quickly, that became kind of the big badge of honor. We were still, this was in the day, we still operated in cubicle farms in our offices.
Oh, yeah.
And people had these ribbons pasted on the wall in their cubicles. And it was a real badge of honor for who had the most ribbons. And it was a self-administering thing. There was no committee that voted there. You know, it was just an individual honor system. And there was a place on the back of it to write your little thank you note, you know, and give to people. And it was a huge, huge boost to morale and cooperation in the whole group. And it really served a good purpose to turn off that kind of natural competition thing that had evolved, and my people were leaning into, because that was kind of the rule of the road, if you will. We sort of flipped the whole script on that.
Nice.
So, Ken, as you mentioned rallying a team around you to help push forward these changes. Number one, how long did that change take to really start to show up and you know, become kind of a measurable outcome?
It took a couple of years. It actually did. Another thing that I set my mind to was trying to coach everybody in the bank into what I call the middle of the spectrum. Here's the point. If you take a spectrum, you can put almost everybody on it. And the way I was thinking about it is this: it takes adults to work successfully together. These are people that recognize there are going to be differences of opinion, but know how to discuss them in a mature fashion and resolve issues together. At one end of the spectrum, you have the obnoxiously assertive people. These are the people that always try to get their way through intimidation and bullying, but not through reasoning and rational discussion. And at the other end of the spectrum, you got the passive aggressive people. Those are the ones that actually almost never state their opinion openly, always, at the water cooler or in the hallway when you're not around. And when you're talking, they're always smiling and nodding. And my goal was to get all those people at the ends of the spectrum toward the middle. And I worked for about 2 years on that. Now, at the time, the organization was only 1,500 people or so. And of course, I got my entire team working on this effort with me. I wasn't doing it by myself. But eliminating the people at the ends of the spectrum really helped a huge amount in this effort to create a productive and happy culture. I will say one thing, though. The obnoxiously assertive people are easier to get rid of because you can find them easily.
Yeah.
The passive aggressive people, they hide out, and it takes years sometimes to figure
it out. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, maybe it's the obvious question. In that process to get people to the middle, were there times you just had to have the tough talk and say, it appears to me you're not getting what we're saying here. We're going to invite you to leave.
Absolutely. We had a sort of a 3-step process. The first one was individual coaching. The second one was, and I don't mean 20 sessions, I mean 1 or 2. And the second step in the process, if that didn't work, we'd go to what I called intervention. 4 or 5 of us together would get them in a room and explain to them, this is your last chance. And if that didn't work, then we invited them to go work at a competing bank.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's consistent with a lot of the writing and teaching that's there, and what the one book that comes to my mind is, of course, Jim Collins' favorite work, A Good to Great, and talking about getting the right people on the bus that are going to be in alignment with your vision and your value system. Because, I have heard it stated that when we talk about culture at a company, it's not quite as complex or mysterious as it sounds. Culture is ultimately nothing more than the way we choose to do things.
Exactly. And people get so confused when I use that word, so I almost automatically try to define it for them. I word it slightly different, but it means the same as what you said. I say it's a kind of a set of rules or expectations around how we treat each other. And in addition, how we treat people outside our organization.
Right.
It's nothing mysterious. And the other thing, which I'm sure you'll agree with, is that every organization has a culture, whether people realize it or not. You put 2 people in a room together and given enough time together, a culture will emerge.
That's right.
Whether they articulate it or not, there's a culture.
Right. That's right. Because they come to a sense of how they're going to work together, how they're going to treat each other, how they're going to communicate, how they're going to promote or operate on their, execution. And that in and of itself is a culture.
Another way I got that idea was my very first job in banking was at a bank that was 150 years old at the time, but actually got merged into the Bank of America a couple of years after I joined. It was Shawmut Bank in Boston. And we had a very enlightened head of HR when I joined, and this woman decided that we were going to have an exercise, and that exercise was trying to figure out what kind of sports team we would be if we were a sports team. they brought in consultants and they interviewed everybody. There's a couple thousand people. And they concluded that we were at Shama, we were the hockey team because we went around hitting the people from the other teams over the head with our hockey sticks. The decision was made at the top that we wanted to be a basketball team, not a hockey team. And so we all worked on it and we became much more professional. And we still won as much. Actually, we won more, but we weren't known as ruffians anymore. We were known as pros.
more refined ball handling there.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's a great exercise. Well, Ken, I want to go back to something you said, and I don't want to miss this opportunity. You are an accomplished CEO of a large organization. The question that always comes up in a lot of my coaching engagements is this topic of the imposter syndrome. You made the statement, if I can paraphrase, when you were promoted as CEO, you realized you didn't really know what you were going to be doing. So are you telling me you suffered your own form of imposter syndrome for a little bit there?
Well, I would word it more positively. I think that if I had pretended to know what I was doing, I definitely would have been an imposter. But in point of fact, you're actually driving at another element in the book. I think that it's really important that leaders are what we call authentic. And authentic means that they're not posing, they're not imposters. They are who they say they are. And if they're not exactly the way they should be, they work on self-improvement.
Yeah.
One of the examples I would give would be, I always thought I was such a nice guy, but when I became CEO, we had a 360 within the first year to figure out what other people thought. And although I was apparently well respected, there were a number of people that thought I was somewhat harsh, and that didn't set well. So I was quite well coached after that on toning down my harshness. It's one thing to be insistent because people like decisiveness in a leader, but it's another thing to be harsh. And so that was something I had to face and work on. But I don't think very many leaders that I've known anyway have done a self-assessment and figured out what the things that they do are that are good and what the things that they do are that really need to be fixed, and then work hard on fixing them.
I agree totally. I think it's such a challenge for people that are climbing the ladder, so to speak, or they've been given that opportunity to advance in the organization up to potentially C-suite type roles. But, without any coaching or mentorship or learning about the gaps they may be exhibiting, I always talk about in my coaching, I love a premise that is behind the Hogan personality assessments. Dr. Hogan, in some of his writings, talks about the difference between the identity story, that's the story we tell ourselves about who and what we are, versus our reputation. That's the story we create in others when they perceive us as we show up. And so, to use your example, you thought you were a pretty nice guy just getting things done, and it turned out that people viewed it as harsh.
Yeah.
So it needed to be adjusted, and you prudently went about finding that adjustment. And
well, I like that comparison you just made. I hadn't thought about that before necessarily in those words, but one of the things I always felt was when I was evaluating people that worked with me, that there were a number of people whose self-image didn't correspond to others people's image of them. And that those people invariably were, in my mind, less mature. That one of the marks of maturity is when your self-image and other people's image of you match up well. And it's particularly important in leadership because, as I said, people are subconsciously following leaders.
Right,
And,
right.
If you're harsh, others will start being harsh, even without even intending to, I believe.
Right, right. Well, and what you just said is what we now today in modern business speak, we talk about emotional intelligence in leaders, and that's that ability. It starts with that ability to be consciously aware of what really is going on, reading the room properly, and then being willing to make those adjustments. If you may believe your self story is all truth, beauty, and light, but when the room tells you no, that's not at all how you show up, then the emotionally intelligent leader will say, okay, I'm willing. I'll take this in, take it under advisement, and make a change. Don't just read the book and throw it in the trash can.
Yeah. I'd like to introduce another topic in this that relates to all of this, if you don't mind.
Please.
And that is when I became CEO in 2001, one of the biggest questions I had in my mind is, how do we go about making decisions at the top of the organization? And the reason I posed that question is because I didn't like the way other CEOs that I had worked for went about doing it. There were a lot of bad models out there, I thought. One model is the autocratic model, where the CEO recognizes they're the final authority. That's good, but they don't really consult others before they make decisions. They're making decisions in a vacuum, which often results in subpar decision making. At the other end of the spectrum, there is the consensus-oriented CEO who says, I'm going to make sure that we achieve consensus before we act. But that's not very good either, because it's inefficient, takes way too long. There is actually no such thing as consensus, in my opinion, meaning when you think you've arrived at consensus, there are always a handful of people that are just being passive aggressive. They don't really agree, but they feel they have to go along. And then the other method that sometimes used is the democratic method. We'll just vote on it. And I think that's crazy too, because what CEO in their right mind is going to say to the board, we made a big mistake, but it's not my fault. We voted. There'll be a new CEO soon. So I really studied this pretty quickly, not over years, over weeks. And I came to the conclusion that my model was going to be this guy called Cyrus the Great, who was the head of Persia about 2,500 years ago. And all we know about Cyrus the Great, which may not even be true, is that he allegedly said, diversity in council, unity in action. So we developed a decision-making process for the team at the top that we called the 3 Ds. The first D was discuss or debate. The second D was decide. And the third D was deliver. And here's the point. During the first of the 3 Ds, the debate phase, everybody on the team had to voice their opinions because that's what I'm paying them for. Their intelligence and their experience. And I wanted to hear it so that I could make a better decision at the end. Once that period of debate was over, then it was incumbent on me to make a decision, because I was, after all, the CEO, and that's what I was being paid to do. And then after that, we went through the delivery phase, which is turning the decision into action. And this is the confusing part for many people if you don't spend a lot of time helping them to understand it. During the debate phase, it's important that they tell me when they disagree with me. But after the decision, during the delivery phase, they can't keep arguing about the decision. They have to support it. And if they don't want to support it, they really should go someplace else, because we can't have a bunch of people that are sabotaging what we're trying to accomplish. But in fairness, we then added a fourth D at the end, which was debrief, meaning any decision that you make, there should be a time frame, like 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half or something, at which point you stop and you review, how did it work? And did it work well or not? And if it didn't, changing it and being honest about it. We thought it was a good decision, but it wasn't.
Yeah. The military has a discipline along that line called the after action report. And after an engagement happens and there's been a battle plan and all this deployment and the skirmish is now over, there's a debrief on how did that go? Yeah. Did it work out the way we wanted it to? Did we learn something tactically or strategically that we need to do different next time? And then that goes in the data bank for consideration when the next opportunity comes up that needs a decision.
So and, I like that. I think as I read a lot of biographies, and I like biographies of generals in particular, the best generals have the same process. When they're faced with a big decision to make, they expect the people that report to them to tell them honestly what they think. But once they make the decision, they expect those same people to support it. And it's really important that they support it.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Well, we don't have a lot of time left, Ken. Let's shift gears. Tell us a little bit about the China experience and some of your elements that are in your book on that topic.
Yes, I will. Thank you. My wife and I went to China for 4 years. The goal was to build a bank that was a joint venture bank. On the one side was a bank called Shanghai Pudong Development Bank. It was the biggest bank in Shanghai. In a sense, that my partner was the government or the Chinese Communist Party, because the government owns the banks in China. So that was the other side. Our side was SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, 50%. And the goal was to build a bank that would help technology companies by financing technology companies. I will say that it didn't work as well as we had thought it would. And that's largely because we were not as well prepared as we needed to be. It turned out that our business model did not work in China. But we'd already taken it to so many other countries where it did work. We made the fatal mistake of assuming that it would work anywhere.
Yeah.
But you know what? One of the biggest problems we have, and especially people who take their businesses to China, is this problem of what I call taking your mental models with you and superimposing them on the new environment, assuming that they're going to work. But the truth is they don't always work. And I think that's the way we get through life. We develop, I call them mental models. It's just basically an understanding of how things work. And when we go to other places, we assume that things are going to work the same way. And often as not, when we get evidence that shows us that they actually aren't working, we misinterpret the evidence. Instead of saying, hey, I got the wrong mental model, we say, oh, we've just got to improve it here and improve it there, and it'll end up working. But actually, many Western business models will not work in China.
Interesting. Well, sounds like that's a topic for a whole other show here.
Yeah,
but note to
do that.
Note to self, I would at some point like to hear a lot more about that. Well, Ken, as we kind of wrap up, number one, thank you for sitting in and sharing this. Tell folks the best way they might get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more or having you come talk to their organization.
Well, the best way to get a hold of me, I think, would probably be to go to LinkedIn, Ken Wilcox, and you just pump in. Excuse me, I thought that was off. LinkedIn and look up Ken Wilcox, Silicon Valley Bank, and you'll find me. And you can send a LinkedIn message. If I'm happy to give you my email address if you thought people might like it.
We'll put that in the show notes and share that with everybody as usual. So, but Ken, thank you so much for sitting in, and thank you for all your time out there in the business world and developing the right kind of culture as you go. And folks, we will have links to Ken's 2 books also in the show notes, so you can hop out and take a look at those. But one last time, Ken, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Best wishes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, folks, we're about up on time, and I want to thank you for sitting in. As always, I'd like to remind you we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube, channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out all the content and the work. I am offering a program that I call Vision 25. It's a 6-part coaching package with me, one-on-one. If you are in the mindset and mode of kind of revamping and reevaluating things, setting a vision, mission, and strategy for your 2025, would love to help you do that work. You can hop over to my website at dougthorpe.com. There'll be a link there for that package offering, Vision 25. And with that, I'm going to sign off, say goodbye, go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.